Welcome, everybody. My name is Barbara D. Michelle, council member, and I'm calling the October 13th council study session to order. Before we move on to tonight's agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. On March the 6th, the mayor issued an emergency proclamation declaring a civil emergency in the city due to the COVID-19 outbreak. On March 24th, the governor issued Proclamation 2028, prohibiting meetings that fall under the Open Public Meetings Act. The proclamation has been extended through November the 9th. Tonight's meeting will be held entirely remotely. The meeting will be recorded, streamed live, and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting or make comments. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There is a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after the staff presentation and council question and answer period on tonight's agenda items. If there is anyone on the call now who would like to make public comments but did not sign up, please press please press *3 on your phone now or under the later comment period, and we will call on you using the last 2 digits of your phone number. Council President Hunt will also share a summary of any comments that have been emailed regarding tonight's agenda items. I will now take roll call of the council members in attendance. Please say "here" when I call your name. Councilmember Goodman.
Here.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Council President Hunt.
Here.
Councilmember Martz.
Here.
Deputy Council President Ray.
Here.
And Councilmember Walsh.
Here.
Thank you. In addition, the following city staff are participating in tonight's meeting: City Administrator Wally Bobkowitz, Deputy City Administrator Andrea Snyder, Community Planning and Development Director Keith Niven, Finance Director Beth Goldberg, and City Clerk Tina Eggers. Other city staff may also be in attendance and on hand for questions. For those members of the public on the call, welcome. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. The first item on the agenda is public comment. And clerk, has anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Thank you. I have one caller, Randy. Did you wish to speak now or reserve your comments for the agenda item?
I guess it's up to the council if they're taking comment during the item. I wanted to speak to the staff presentation on affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we will be taking comment now or under the agenda item.
I can just do it now if that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. Council, thank you for the time. My name is Randy Banneker. I'm speaking on behalf of the Seattle-King County Realtors. And I just wanted to call in and thank you for your work on housing affordability and encourage you to continue forward courageously and vigorously. Housing, as you know, is among our region's chief challenges, with everyday impacts on families and the quality of their lives, as well as the long-term sustainability of our environment and our economic prosperity. While your focus tonight is housing principally for below median income earners, I wanted to underscore that housing is very much a continuum. It's a related market, and every market rate unit that is put into production relieves demand side pressure for every unit priced below it. Today, a family earning the median income as identified by ARCH can afford to buy a home of about $411,000. In Issaquah, it won't surprise you to hear that a single-family home, resale home, is $1 million plus. And the most affordable option in Issaquah is a median price condo at a little more than $463,000. So that median income family, in terms of ownership options in King County, really only choice is to drive to South King County for something that they can buy. And what that tells us is that affordability is very much about supply-demand imbalance, and that imbalance has been in play in our region for many years. We've enjoyed sustained job growth, but we haven't been as good as keeping pace with housing, and housing is where jobs go at night. If you're able to see it, I did include a graph when I signed up that just illustrates King County housing inventory in relationship to price. And it's a fairly dramatic graph. It's an inverse proportion. Whereas a healthy and balanced real estate market requires about 4 to 6 months of inventory, in countywide for the past several years, it's been about 2 months. And today in Issaquah, it's about 25 days. And so we need to be bold about increasing housing supply. And I think we can do it in ways that maintain, if not improve, neighborhood quality. And these includes a lot of the strategies you've been working on, more multifamily options, particularly on the edges of single-family neighborhoods, the use of the multifamily tax exemption program, which it appears that Issaquah has boosted its income qualified units by nearly 18% using that tool, and increasing the use of our existing neighborhoods with greater and strategic deployment of duplexes, triplexes, and accessory dwelling units. Lastly, and in closing, I'd also encourage your fierce engagement in the regional discussion. The Puget Sound Regional Council is forecasting the need for 888,000 units, new housing units by 2050. And the King County will get the lion's share of that allocation at about 470,000 units. So we need to work together as a region to ensure that those units are on the ground and have the ability to meet the demand as our region grows. Again, thank you for your work, and please lean on us. We'd love to support and help your work in any way we can with regards to housing. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? People sign up for comment?
Thank you. I have no one else signed up to speak, and I do not see any caller who has raised their hand at this time.
All right, thank you. I forgot to read the guidelines for public comment, but Mr. Banneker did a very good job of staying within those guidelines, so thank you for those comments. We will go ahead then and start with the first agenda item tonight, which is an update on affordable housing, and this will be presented by Keith Niven, Community Planning and Development Director. So I will turn it over to Keith.
Thank you, Councilmember DeMichelle, and good evening, City Council. Keith Niven, Director of Community Planning and Development. So this is an informational item for the City Council. There's no action expected. It's really more just to start a conversation. So the presentation is intended to be a high-level summary on affordable housing. I will try not to go too far into the details, but would be glad to return in the future if the council would like to have a deeper conversation about any aspect of this topic. And Tina, were you going to share the presentation?
Hi, this is Clerk Egger speaking. I do not have your presentation at hand, but I could locate it on the R drive if need be.
That would be helpful if you could do that.
While we're waiting, Council President Hunt, would you like to share any public comments we received while we're waiting for the presentation? Oh, there we go. There we go. Let's go in order then. Go ahead, Keith.
Thank you, and thank you for the delay. Tina, if you could advance to the second slide, please.
All right, let me try this one more time and see if we can have success. It should be displaying what you desire at this moment.
Thank you very much. So my goals for this evening are to, one, describe the policy actions the city has taken to address the need for affordable housing. Two, provide general information on affordable housing regulations and incentives aimed at creating affordable housing. Three, briefly describe our longstanding membership in ARCH. And four, review the effectiveness of existing affordable housing programs in Issaquah. There are two documents that have been included with this agenda item: an affordable housing summary document and the 2019 housing report card. There's also information about affordable housing located in the appendices of the city's housing strategy work plan. And this evening, I will reference information from all of those documents in my presentation. So Tina, if you could advance to the third slide. Thank you. I'm going to do my best this evening to minimize my use of industry jargon and acronyms, but if I slip and you need me to better define a term, please do not hesitate to let me know and I will do my best. AMI. So this is a term used to compare a household's income in relation to the area median. For affordable housing, we regularly throw out 30% AMI, 60% AMI, 80% AMI. These would be housing at prices affordable to someone making no more than that percentage of the area median. In 2018, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, defined area median income for a family of four in King and Snohomish counties as earning an annual income of $103,400. Okay. Next item is housing cost burden. How this works is a family of four earning 80% of AMI, based on the 103,400 median that I mentioned above, would have an annual income of $82,720 and could pay a monthly housing cost of $2,068 without being cost burdened. Right now, the county estimated that there were over 156,000 households in our county that were housing cost burden. In other words, paying more than 30% of their income for housing. The four definitions at the bottom of this page are simply categories of affordable housing that are listed in Title 18, which is our land use code, Chapter 21, which is the chapter dealing with affordable housing for our city. Tina, if you could advance to the next slide, please. So local government typically does not construct or own housing, but in many ways can influence the amount of affordability of housing found in the community. This can be accomplished through, one, supply, zoning actions allowing for increased supply of housing units. As the gentleman who spoke under public comments mentioned, price is often a direct correlation of supply and demand. The second item is budgetary decisions, directly or indirectly committing resources such as revenue, land, and staff support to the preservation or creation of affordable housing. Number three would be regulations and incentives that leverage market housing projects to include affordable housing. Number four would be relaxing development regulations and fees. And number five would be engaging with big business and community partners also committed to the provision of housing and affordable housing. As we know, affordable housing is a regional issue and crosses city boundaries as people make decisions for housing location. In that regard, King County has provided policies and goals and actions that apply countywide as well as to the cities located within the county. In addition, in 2017, King County put together a task force to address affordable housing. In December of 2018, and then revised in June of 2019, the Regional Affordable Housing Task Force published their final report and recommendations. Among other things, the report identifies a short-term countywide goal for the preservation or creation of 44,000 affordable units in the next 5 years. Okay, community planning and development staff have identified the need to evaluate the recommendations from that task force report, specifically as it relates to expectations for local governments. There are 64 identified actions for cities within that document. We hope to be able to do that in next year's work plan. Tina, if you could advance to the next slide. So starting with joining ARCH in 1994 and the adoption of our first comprehensive plan in 1995, the city has realized there's no one way to address the needs of housing affordability in our city. There are a dozen items I will briefly cover that account for the city's commitment to the provision of affordable housing. Number one, starting with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan contains policies from the Growth Management Act, as well as city-specific policies addressing housing affordability. If you look at the summary document prepared for this evening, we have listed out those policies for your reference. The policies contained in the comprehensive plan do not directly create affordable housing in Issaquah. Rather, those policies serve as guidance for some of the implementing city codes that will be discussed below. Number two is the strategic plan. In 2019, the city embarked on its first ever citywide strategic plan. As with the comprehensive plan, the strategic plan provides two objectives, one in growth and development and the other in social and economic vitality, that provide community guidance for code and future implementing actions relating to housing diversity and housing affordability. Number three, in 2017, the City Council adopted the Housing Strategy Work Plan. That work plan identified 9 strategies to improve housing diversity and affordability in the city. One of the attachments for tonight's presentation is the 2019 Housing Report Card. Within that document, staff have provided a status report of progress on those 9 strategies. What we have currently in progress, we are working on first, the educational outreach piece for accessory dwelling units. That's strategy number 1, action item 1.4. And second, we are working on creating a database of lower rent apartment buildings in our community. That is strategy 3, action 3.1. Staff is due to provide an analysis and update of all 9 strategies and the work plan to the City Council in 2022. Number 4, inclusionary requirements. As part of the development moratorium in 2016, resulting in part from the realization that no affordable units were provided with the Atlas and Anthology apartment complexes, the city adopted mandatory inclusionary requirements for central Issaquah, 7.5% for the mixed-use zone, 12.5% in the urban core, and 15% in the vertical mixed-use overlay zone. Since these code adoptions in 2018, the city has had no residential development projects in these zones. Prior to this meeting, Councilmember Hall asked a question asking how much affordable housing this might produce. This takes a bit of guesswork and crystal balling on our part. What we do is we look at the total amount of land zoned in each of these categories, taking out portions that are anticipated to be non-residential or commercial, and estimating densities for future residential or mixed use. To answer the council member's question, we believe it's possible we could see about 260 additional affordable housing units provided from the inclusionary requirements that we've adopted. Number 5 would be cluster housing. The provisions in the code identify as one of the purposes for cluster housing the provision of affordable housing. If covenant-restricted affordable housing is provided as part of a cluster subdivision proposal, the number of units per code is negotiated as part of a project-specific development agreement. This code has not been modified since 2008 and would be one of the things addressed potentially in the update of the Land Use Code, Title 18. Number 6 would be fee waivers and priority review. Through code, the city has adopted both a fee waiver incentive and a priority review for projects meeting our definition of affordable housing. The priority review means community planning and development staff will review affordable projects and other projects providing community benefit in less time than applications for standard projects. Number 7 would be multifamily tax exemption. On December 18th, 2017, the City Council approved Ordinance 2821 that established the multifamily tax exemption program as a pilot for the Trailhead or TOD project. That's Housing Strategy 5, by the way. Number 8 would be density bonus. The density bonus applies only to central Issaquah. In exchange for providing affordable housing, the developer could receive either additional floor area ratio or building height for their project. And we've actually had a couple projects take advantage of the density bonus provision. Number 9 would be park and parking reductions. City code allows for both reductions in the required parking for affordable housing as well as a reduction in required park space. These measures are seen as ways to decrease the cost of providing affordable housing. Number 10 is development agreements. The city has used development agreements to get a number of affordable housing units built in the city. This is seen as one of the bigger community benefits gained from entering into a development agreement. There were affordable housing requirements for Issaquah Highlands, Talus, Rowley's, and the WashDOT TDR and Lakeside development agreements. Number 11, Issaquah is a member Arch City. I've mentioned Arch earlier. Arch stands for Regional Coalition for Housing, and it is a partnership of county and East King County cities who have joined together to assist with preserving and increasing the supply of housing for low and moderate income households. Being a part of this organization has allowed the city to stretch our investments in affordable housing by leveraging our local investments with regional, state, and federal sources. And number 12 would be land set aside. There's one tool that I forgot to include that Councilmember Goodman brought to my attention earlier this week, and that is the city has in the past made land available for affordable housing, specifically for the YWCA. Now, the council has had numerous conversations about trying to understand whether there were other opportunities to surplus land for potential affordable housing projects. And I know that there is work on trying to develop that policy for the surplusing of city properties. Tina, if you could please advance to the last slide. Okay, so up to this point, I've been identifying the actions taken by the city to get more housing affordable to a broader spectrum of our community. Now consider this slide the productivity slide. There are two pie charts on this slide, and I will describe why I decided to give you two images and not just one. So chart number one shows the number of affordable housing units created by the tools we have discussed earlier. They represent units that have been secured by a covenant or some guarantee that they remain affordable. As you can see, the biggest slice of the pie, so to speak, is development agreements. But there's also a big category called other. So I'm going to spend a brief moment describing what other means. What other means is it represents an effort for the creation of affordable housing that is not led by the city. So for example, we have a number of affordable rental units that were older apartment buildings purchased by King County Housing Authority and have been basically retained as affordable housing. This is really part of what we were getting at with Housing Strategy 3, which I mentioned before, creating a database of those lower rental unit apartment projects in town because they potentially are an efficient way for us to secure additional affordable housing. The reason why I included the second pie chart on this on this image is I showed the TOD project in, which shows up as kind of a light gray. And the reason why I did that was it's listed under MFTE, if you're wondering why it doesn't say TOD somewhere. What I wanted to do and why I wanted to show that is, one, I think that we believe that that project will come to fruition. It hasn't entered permitting yet, so it's really still just a potential. But what I wanted to show was how much the pie chart changes by just creating one bigger new project of affordable housing in our community. It really shows, I think, how big of a deal I think that really is. And so, although we've accomplished much in terms of actively creating affordable housing opportunities, we need to continue being diligent and looking for new opportunities to continue to increase our affordable housing, as finding housing remains one of the biggest struggles for residents of our metropolitan area. With that, I think I've spoken enough, and I'm going to stop and invite the council's questions and comments.
Thank you. I am too. I'm watching the chat to see if there are questions or comments. Councilmember Walsh has a question and a comment.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. First, I wanted to say thank you so much for this report card and the data that comes along with it. Council President Hunt, no, you're going to wait. Okay. I learned so much from it. And so I look forward to seeing this continue on and seeing kind of the trends that we can see in that. The question I have is looking at those pie charts. You know, we can see the big benefits that we can get for affordable housing from development agreements and from big projects like MFTE, but also so you've talked about that other pie chart piece, which is finding those naturally lower priced and seeing if we can work with King County Housing or, you know, just develop those in as affordable. We know what we're doing on the MFTE. Is there anything else that we can do on the development agreements, or is there anything that we should do to put something in line behind the TOD project, since we know that took so very long? I'm just trying to look ahead and see what should be our next step to get some of those big wins.
So great question, council member. So yeah, part of my messaging should be that we need to be opportunistic to kind of leverage what limited resources we have to get the most for them. There's two pieces I think are maybe the next wave on the horizon. One is looking at that city inventory and whether or not there are any parcels that we have. I mentioned the YWCA, I think, in terms of that was one of the land dedications we made to really significantly change the affordable housing for that location in Issaquah Highlands. But the TOD project is also a project where we are donating potentially a piece of land to try and get that project to work. And that's part of the RV park. But there's other parcels in town that we've talked about that might be also good candidates for affordable housing locations. And I know that there has been a request and there will be a policy document brought forward at some point that will talk about surplusing public land and what would be those things that we would want to accomplish with that surplusing. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, creating this database of more reasonable cost rental units in town. What that does is it allows us, this is almost kind of an economic development technique where you contact property owners, you build rapport, and you start a dialogue for trying to figure out if there's a time when they might be wanting to put their project up for sale. It might give us the opportunity to maybe get involved and maybe leverage Arch or King County Housing Authority or some other to step in and buy it, as opposed to it going to some other developer who might bulldoze it and build something more expensive in its place. So I think those are probably the low-hanging fruit, if there are any right now, council member. But like I said, we have to kind of, and I may change my mind after we look at the King County's task force report and the 60 some odd actions that cities were expected to take there, that there might be some other things that we might be talking about in the near future.
So just as a quick follow-up, you mentioned a policy conversation about surplusing properties. Do we know when that is coming up for us?
I see my boss has unmuted, so I'm going to defer to the city administrator on that question.
Councilmember Walsh, members of the council, good evening. We have done the preliminary work on this. We were ready to come to the council in the April timeframe, and things changed in the world. We still have that information. We've not come forward with it because, quite honestly, we're still trying to see what impacts the current economic crisis may have on property values. This is certainly something we could bring back to the council this fall. If not, my anticipation is the administration would bring it back at the first of the year.
Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh, did you have your questions answered? And
I did indeed. Thank you.
thanks. Council President Hunt, do you want to share the emails we received?
Yes, thank you. This is Council President Hunt. We did receive 2 emails from both from the same resident, both regarding affordable housing. One was with regards to the needs for parking for affordable housing, to take that into account for affordable housing as well as low-income housing. And then more specifically and directly related to this item, we received an email from this resident in which the resident firstly thought we have a lot of good strategy, but not a lot of strategy that's supported directly by a work plan. Also, that housing instability is a huge problem and is partly masked by the eviction moratorium, so that needs to be addressed now. Asking that we consider existing properties in town for housing, potentially if they were to be foreclosed or changes in use. And also looking into other options for mixed use housing as well as group homes. And lastly, also talking to the importance of needing to prevent tear downs that are currently affordable housing or might become affordable housing in the future. And that concludes the summary of comments that we received by email on this item.
Thank you. I see that Councilmember Goodman would like to make a comment, but before we do that, I'm wondering if Clerk Agers has anyone indicating in the public who's indicating they would like to comment.
Thank you. I have no one who signed up to speak, but we do have Miss Marsh on the line, so I could unmute and see if she's interested in speaking at this time.
Okay.
Miss Marsh, would you like to have the floor? Let's try one more time.
She looks like she's still muted on my side.
I have sent a request to unmute.
That was really awkward. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. You have the floor.
Okay. I did raise my hand, by the way, and then it wouldn't let me speak, and on it went. So, this is Connie Marsh, and I live up on Squawk Mountain. To organize my thoughts, there's affordable housing and there's housing affordability. And there are people who are on the very edge of being able to stay in their homes in Issaquah who have to pay the bill for affordable housing because it comes out of the things that they pay for the city. And so in this presentation, that balance of trying to keep people housed and the creating future affordable housing for people who don't live here is not considered. And I think it's linchpin because the town is supposed to be representing those of us who live here, not future people. So then I'm going to move on quickly to development agreements. So for example, the Costco development agreement did not have any housing, much less affordable housing. And the Raleigh development agreement has an extraordinarily large amount of development that has to be put in place before they have to create any housing or any affordable housing with that. So we need to do one, probably no more development agreements, or if we decide we do want to do development agreements, it has to have a vastly different emphasis on bringing in housing that people can afford, especially that under 30% group of people for housing. Now, when we long ago had a conversation with developers about more units, one of the builders said, be careful what you wish for, because if you bring in units that are expensive, that's just going to raise the value of your housing. So if you bring in units that cost $3,000 a month to rent, that doesn't give you more affordable housing. So you have to be cautious in sort of the generalization of supply and demand. Supply and demand of what? So rather than being a total downer, I absolutely support reserving lower priced housing stock for affordable housing rather than tearing things down and then having to pay an extraordinarily large amount of money to construct super expensive new housing. King County has taken this pathway and is finding it more effective and less expensive. So I'm going to summarize quickly. Don't forget the people who actually live here and your enthusiasm for creating future cheap housing for those who have yet to move here, because you could be making people not be able to stay in their own homes. And I don't think you want to do that. And then you need to ensure that development agreements actually are required to bring in your affordable housing. That won't cost the community money. And then last of all, great idea to try to prevent the older housing from being destroyed so that you can have more price effective lower income housing, especially for the under 30%. And I will say, I don't really want to pay for people who are making $80,000 a year so that they can live in Issaquah when many of the people that I know are making way less than that. So thank you very much on that topic. Hopefully it's easier to get in on the next topic.
Thank you. Clerk Agers, do we have anybody else indicating that they want to speak?
We do not. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Councilmember Goodman for comments and followed by Council President Hunt with a question and a comment. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. First of all, I want to thank Keith and Kristen in particular for working on this for the last several weeks. I really appreciate all the time it took you guys to pull all this together. I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to have baseline information from which we can work. You mentioned the land, Keith, and it's not just that land for the one project that you mentioned, but the city has donated land, and just a couple of years ago donated a parcel in the Highlands that had significant value. So in the future, I'd like all of the land donations to be included with their value. And just the reason for that is just to show the contributions, the value of all of the contributions that it takes for the city to get affordable housing. I think all of that information, fact-based information, is important for knowing what we need to do financially as a city in order to get to where we have stated that we want to be. On your slide, I think it was 2, but I can't remember. You mentioned regulations and incentives. Typically, when we talk about regulations and incentives, I think often we're thinking of regulations as incentives or encouragements. There's also the opposite of that, which is regulations which can do the opposite, which is not, actually contribute to not getting what we want in terms of affordable housing. And so at some point, I think it would be important for us to, in order for us to evaluate the effects of our decisions when we're talking about regulations, it would be important to talk about the regulations and the effect that they have. So for example, the more regulations and the more expensive you make development, that makes it more challenging for developers to build affordable housing. And the more challenging it gets, the more expensive it gets for the city, because the city then has to create more incentives and contribute more money, land, and other things in order to get affordable housing. I'm not suggesting that that is a bad thing, but what I am saying that I think in order for us to make informed decisions, we have to know what the effect is of our decisions, which includes regulations. And as we're embarking on rewrites of Title 18 and a couple of other titles in our code, it's important to know the effect that those increasing regulations have on the ability of us to get affordable housing without increasing the subsidies, whatever those subsidies might be, whether it's tax exemptions, impact fee waivers, giving up permit fees and donated land, or cash contributions. All of those things matter. So I just wanted to talk about that for a minute, about regulations and the effect that it has. Then the last thing I wanted to say is I was hoping that we could get our own webpage for affordable housing, so we could put this information out so it's easily accessible to us anytime we look at it, and more importantly for the public. But again, I want to thank you for the presentation. I think it's important, first of all, for all of us here tonight and for the public to have the same baseline information. So thank you.
Council President Hunt.
Thank you. So, this Council President Hunt, my question was about there was mention of surplus of city properties, and I think the first step to do that would be to do an inventory and a study of properties that might be surplus or used in a different way than they are currently. And so I wondered what the status of that is.
If I may, Councilmember DiMichele, just to repeat what I said earlier, we were ready to come to the council in the spring with that information. We are prepared to do that in the future. If the council would like to see that in the fall, we can try to get that on the agenda. Otherwise, our plan was at the first of the year.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, has there been any consideration of a community lands trust approach for affordable housing?
Council President Hunt, Keith Niven, Director of Community Planning and Development. Not that I'm aware of. I'll ask Kristen to weigh in if she knows differently, but I'm not aware of any, no.
Hi, this is Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner. I apologize. There we go. And actually, no, I'm not aware of it either. No.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure of that before I made my comments. So I apologize for not sending that in advance, but I did want to make comments on two topics. One of them is there was mention of the accessory dwelling units, and that there might be more communication to people about that and about the option for doing that. One suggestion that was made to me by a community member would also be to have videos or examples of success stories from Issaquah, people who have made ADUs and have had success with that and have had a positive experience, and that video could then be on the website or used in other materials to let people know about individuals' stories. So I thought that was a good suggestion. I wanted to pass it along. And then my second comments are around, we did have a number of comments about the land and that the city has donated land in the past. And I think this also, the community land trust idea might be something worth exploring as we think about land and about surplusing of potential land, or about what the options are there. The community land trust basically is a model where a nonprofit or potentially government involved entity with community members would own the land, and then the property would be owned by the individual. And I think it's an interesting model, and I think it's something that might allow us to meet some of our strategies. It could be a tool that we could use to meet some of our strategies. I think it could also help us achieve the goal of mitigating tear downs, but in a way that maintains the buildings. And so I think it could be used to actually address multiple of our goals that are in the housing strategy work plan that don't have specific tools associated with them.
Councilmember Fall.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Zach Hall here. I guess just first, Director Niven, thanks so much for answering my question about kind of gaming out what the unit count would look like in the central Issaquah area. I think that's helpful information. And just a couple clarifying questions. So that is a prediction based on the inclusionary zoning requirements that we have. So that would be just the affordable units in those buildings, right? There would be market rate units. We wouldn't expect only 200 so units. And okay, good, perfect. And then the other question, quick clarifying question that I had was, actually, it's funny that you mentioned the Regional Affordable Housing Task Force report, because I had it with me today. It is good reading, by the way. I would just recommend it if you haven't read it. It's a good one. So did you say the kind of local actions, we would be having a conversation next year about including that in our work plan?
So Yeah, so for the first step would be me and my 2/3 FTE long range planner, Kristen. We need to go through that report and go through the 60, I think there's 64 recommended actions for cities. And I think, some of those we've already done. Like, so for example, one of those specifically is to consider MFTE. Well, we've done that. So we can check the box, right? My hope is that we go through those 64 items and that there's 64 check the boxes that we've already done. But it could very well be that there's a number that we haven't contemplated yet. And I think what I envision is Kristen and I putting together a white paper for the council on those 64 action items and identifying where there might be some additional conversation that we could have. And that would be next year, because we can't do that in the next 4 months.
Councilmember DiMichele, if I may, just
Sure.
one quick comment too, just to say, for the sake of direction, that I love Councilmember Goodman's idea about having kind of a central hub on our website for affordable housing. It's a great one.
We'll see what we can do on that front.
All right, are there any other comments or questions from the council? All right, I'm not seeing anything, so I'll just jump in. I did have one comment I wanted to bring to your attention, and I bring it to your attention because the last chart talked about homeless individuals, and it did appear on the chart as though we had a slight dip this last year in homelessness. And so I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that the numbers, it's very, very difficult to get correct numbers for homelessness. And specifically the student homeless numbers from the school district are self-reported numbers. Those are people who, young people who self-report. And I have talked to district administrators who say the actual number is probably 2 to 3 times the number, because many, many people are reluctant for a variety of reasons to self-report being homeless. Having also participated in the one night out count, the night that we did it this last year, it was raining cats and dogs. We didn't find very many people outdoors unsheltered. And it's very easy to skew those numbers. And I'm particularly concerned about those numbers because we are looking at this so-called eviction cliff. And so just bringing to your attention that it's very difficult to get accurate numbers on homelessness. So I also want to join my fellow council members in saying thank you so much. That was a wealth of information. I'm still absorbing a lot of it, and I do appreciate the effort that went into providing us with a really comprehensive report. So thank you very much. Yes, not seeing any other comments or questions. We'll move on to our second agenda item, which is Title 18 Land Use Code Ad Hoc Committee discussion, and it's going to be led by Andrea Snyder, Deputy City Administrator, but we'll also have comments from our ad hoc committee members. So Andrea, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening to members of City Council and those of the public who are watching from home. I am Deputy City Administrator Andrea Snyder and a member of the Title 18 Ad Hoc Committee. The City Council created the Title 18 Ad Hoc Committee to guide the update on the city's land use code, Title 18. We're here tonight to receive feedback on our progress in determining the scope of work for the land use code updates. Other members of the committee, other than myself, include Council President Hunt, Councilmember Goodman, Councilmember Walsh, as well as Community Planning and Development Director Keith Niven, who you just heard from, and the Land Development Manager, Lucy Sloman. So tonight we seek feedback, as I said, on specifically the outcomes chart that starts on page 45 of your packet. That we're hoping to check in with members of council to see, are we hitting the right notes, or is there something significant that we've missed? And so just general feedback or anything specific that you may have would be helpful. The purpose of the outcomes chart is really to provide high-level guidance, to update to the land use code updates, as well as to inform the scope of work. And if you look at the document itself, it starts at the top, like I said, on page 45, with umbrella goals that really apply to every area of the update. Then the document proceeds to walk through significant areas of the update through somewhat of a logic model, attempting to ensure that the update will be in line with city goals, that the update addresses the issues that we've identified so far, and that the land use code updates results in the desired outcomes. The Title 18 Ad Hoc Committee members also want to make sure that you and members of the public are aware that the chart provides really that high-level guidance, and that the actions taken or policy changes suggested within the document will likely evolve and change as we move through the process and hear from members of the public and engage stakeholders, and also through additional research and analysis for best practices. So, which is to say that we're not completely and forever irrevocably wedded to the actions outlined in this document or some of the other concepts therein. They instead really serve as a starting point. And that's what we're hoping to get your feedback on tonight, is as a starting point, do we generally have it right, or are we missing some pieces? So next steps following receiving your feedback, the ad hoc committee will meet to address how this outcome chart translates into the scope of the work to be accomplished, the timeline, as well as the budget for 2021. As noted in your memo, there is a placeholder sum in the proposed budget for professional services work relating to the land use code updates, but this is subject to change pending those discussions. So with that, I ask, before we get into the feedback portion of the evening, are there any questions?
I am not seeing any yet, but I'm wondering, I see that we have emails to summarize. Do members of the ad hoc committee want to make comments at this point? And you don't have to. I just was wondering if anybody does. All right, I'll turn over to Council President Hunt to summarize the emails we received.
Thank you. This Council President Hunt, we did receive an email specifically on this topic, and this person wrote to us that it was great to see this work picked up, and also thought that the goal to modernize the code and incorporate best practices should be a top priority. And that concludes emails on this topic.
All right. Clerk Agers, do we have someone who would like to, oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Walsh, would you like to comment before we go to public comment?
I will wait because my comment is more about the feedback that I'm looking for from the council, so community.
Great, thank you. Clerk Agers, do we have someone who would like to comment from the public?
No one has signed up to speak, but we do have Miss Marsh is on the line, so I'd like to check in with her and see if she'd like the floor. Miss Marsh, if you're able to unmute on your end, you can make comment.
I don't know. Did that do it?
We can hear you.
Okay. Wow. So that's *6, by the way. The chart has made progress over time, and I especially like the idea that the chart is including policy language and potential changes in policy, because our land use section of our comprehensive plan has not been updated in a very long time. So I think, to be realistic, you would say that we were also going to be changing our land use section of our comprehensive plan, and then follow that down to code changes, so that we would be modernizing our alignment with the community values. So this is a step in the right direction, but in code, the devil is in the details. And so I think if the council can work on having a cogent conversation on the policy direction that they are seeking, then it will help in the work product of how to create implementation language to get the town there. There's a gap there right now. So if I was to ask council questions, I would be asking you what the policy changes should be first. I would sort of direct it. Anyway, there you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Clerk Eggers, is there anyone else?
There is not. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go back to Councilmember Walsh then. Take it away.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. As a member of the ad hoc committee, I just want to encourage the other council members that if you have not gotten a chance to go into the details on this, particularly making sure that kind of the goals that you would have for our land use are represented in that goal column, that we're addressing the issues that we think are outstanding that do need to be solved, and then the outcomes. I would really encourage it, and maybe, Andrea, we can send it out as a Word document to the rest of the council, and they can put comments in on the document and send it back. We found that very helpful as a way to look over this. I think the reason we wanted to start with an outcomes chart was so that we made sure that we're pointing our arrow in the right direction. So we're not diving into the code language without knowing the problems that we want to solve. So what we're looking from you guys is making sure, are these the problems we want to solve? Do we have them all down? And are we pointing in the right direction toward that outcomes area? So even if you don't get a chance to comment tonight, it would be great if we could get comments on a Word document.
That's really useful. Thank you. I am still not seeing any comments in the chat. I'll give you a few more seconds because I have some comments. All right, Councilmember Hall, thank you.
Thanks. Hi, this is Councilmember Zach Hall. I actually just have a quick question about one of the goals. And this is, just because you don't know what you don't know, but one of the goals is to ensure the city retains 50% tree canopy. And I'm just wondering what the policy, what's the difference between saying we want to preserve or protect or increase X percent tree canopy versus just pure number of trees, and how does that work and what's better?
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I believe that the city periodically examines the percentage of tree canopy we have. I think the last report to council, I want to say, was last year, but time really flies, especially in 2020. And so I would invite Community Planning and Development Director Keith Niven, if he can weigh in on the rest of your question.
Sure. So I'll try. So I think it's similar to the conversation you guys have been having about performance metrics for the city. It's, what should we measure and what does success look like? And so for the tree code, so right now we have different tree retention and preservation requirements in different parts of the city, just because the code has different it just because it comes from different places. So part of this is what should, at a very high level, what should be our goal for the tree code? Should it be to try and retain the 50% tree canopy that we have now? Because as we continue to develop and as things get denser, the question is what happens to the trees, and can we retain that 50% canopy? That's a very broad brush, I think, objective that we would have with the tree code. There might be other ones, but that's why I think that's listed on that chart.
Councilmember Hall, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'd love to hear from Council President Hunt too.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. From the perspective of the ad hoc committee, I think one of the things we were thinking about with tree canopy versus number of trees is also that when we did the tree canopy study, which I think was about a year ago, we heard a lot from residents about not wanting to just they wanted to keep our forested areas, our open spaces healthy, but they also wanted to retain the overall character of the city as a tree city, USA. And so we wanted to preserve that and keep the tree canopy as a metric that was, I guess, more holistic. And so if not only wanting to preserve the wildland areas, but also the character as a tree city.
Perfect, thank you. Makes perfect sense.
And Council President Hunt, did you have additional comments?
No, I think that Deputy Administrator Snyder did a really good job summarizing our thoughts on the kind of, we wanted this to be high level. We appreciate that.
Thanks. Thank you. Councilmember Martz.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Martz. I have a question, which is this the right part of code to ask about? We've seen a number of instances where homeowners have cut down large numbers of trees on their properties, and it seems like not gotten in trouble or gotten a slap on the wrist. It's a real area of concern. I'm talking about existing homes where somebody just wants to create a territorial view, and so they just lop down lots of trees. And are we looking at strengthening the code and strengthening our ability to respond when people do that? Because it's one thing when you have a trade-off on a new development and you look for mitigations, but it's just really, really disappointing when people just want to, create equity in their home by creating a territorial view at the expense of trees that have been up there far longer than they've owned their homes. Thank you.
Councilmember Martz, go ahead.
Thank you. This is Andrea Snyder. I believe that is the aim, to ensure that the tree canopy reflects and the codes regarding retention and preservation reflect the desired level of tree canopy. And I guess for specifics, Keith, do you want to weigh in again?
What I can tell you is, since the code enforcement or code compliance officer works for me, I can tell you that we have recently cited a Montreux homeowner for $80,000 for cutting trees. And there is a homeowner on Squawk Mountain Loop, I believe, that is going to get a fine of something above $100,000 for tree removal. So if the council believes that our fines are not in the right place, yes, the code is where we would change that. But if you would like some more information about citations that have been levied, we could probably put together a quick report for the council if that's what they would like.
I think in talking to this is Councilmember Martz again. Thank you, Director Niven. I think that it is not particularly well understood in the community what mechanisms are in place, and without looking to publicly shame people, providing more information for the community on the importance for everyone involved that they not do this, and the penalties associated with it, I think would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on this topic? All right, I did have a couple of brief comments that I will pass along when the item is sent out to us. But I did want to talk about number 6, so the diversity of housing. There we go. Last night I attended the Seattle Town Hall led by Professor Rothstein, who is the author of a book called The Color of Law. And he reiterated again the long-standing segregation that occurred in the Seattle area due to redlining and the generational impact of redlining on patterns of housing that we have today. And so looking over the goals and objectives, I first of all commend you all. You've done a great job, but I did not see anything specifically in that plan regarding looking at our patterns of housing to how can we encourage all people to move to Issaquah or to find housing in Issaquah. And so if that could be added, I was particularly looking at item number 6 on the plan. The diversity of housing, I think, would be where that focus should be taken. And so I would like to see us add that in or have that lens as we're going through this process. And then my other comments I will send to Andrea when we get a copy of the plan. But I do think you've done a great amount of work so far, and I really commend you, and I look forward to the next steps. Any other comments before we move on to the last item? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Zach Hall here. I guess just for the sake of speaking again, I'll just say, I think, from a high level, well done. I think you're on the right track. So keep up the good work, if that helps.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we will now go to the last item on the agenda, which is the proposed 2021 budget deliberations. And this is going to be led by our City Administrator, Wally Bobkowitz, and Finance Director, Beth Goldberg. So I'll turn it over to City Administrator Bobkowitz.
Yes, thank you, Council Member DiMichele, members of the Council. We have given you a presentation on the budget. We've asked for you to submit questions. I think we have 30-odd questions that have been submitted since through that time through yesterday. So we're diligently working to get those questions answered, and we'll have that information to you prior to the meeting on October 27th. We did leave tonight for some larger deliberations and then discussion with Councilmember DiMichele as the chair of the meeting this evening. She challenged us with a few particular questions, most of them relating to the use of fund balance. So in talking with Councilmember DiMichele, working with our finance staff, we put together a short presentation that outlines those questions and some responses for the council's consideration. So Councilmember DiMichele, if that's all right with you, I'd like to have Finance Director Goldberg review the questions that you posed and talk a little bit about them. Director Goldberg.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. So I have a short presentation that I would like to share with all of you that I think will facilitate the discussion. I also have a spreadsheet, and it was sent out to all of you earlier today, that we could use if the council desires to model out various impacts of use of fund balance. So I'll walk through the presentation and then switch to this Excel file. Not sure how seamless that will be in this format, but it's 2020. Let's give it a try. So let me first share the presentation. Okay. Can everyone see that?
No.
So briefly to go through fund balance, what we thought we would do tonight, hang on, I've got to toggle through this, is to give you some background about fund balance that will hopefully provide a framework and a basis for your discussion. First, want to go through a few of the questions that Councilmember DiMichele posed to us related to fund balance, and then a framework, the policy framework for you to be grounded in as you're discussing it. Then I'm going to walk through a history of our fund balance and future projections, and then walk through this model that I discussed, and then turn it back to you for discussion. Certainly interrupt me as we go if you have questions as I am presenting. And a potential outcome from the discussion this evening is agreement among the council members on a general approach to fund balance. And maybe one thing I will say before going into the details, this is also, the timing of this is a little bit strange because it is 2020 and so much is in flux with the economy. Our revenue outlook, we are doing for the first time this year a revised revenue forecast that we'll have for you in early November. So depending on that forecast, that could swing things one way or another. So I wanted to just acknowledge that at the outset. So with regards to the policy question, council may recall from my presentation on October 6th that in the 2021 budget, the administration is recommending that we designate or assign a portion of fund balance, $3 million, to account for compensated absence liability. So the first question is there support among council members for the administration's plan to designate this $3 million? And then the amount that's left is undesignated, and there will be a portion that's undesignated whether we designate the $3 million or not. The question for the council is how much of that undesignated or unassigned fund balance does the council wish to remain at the end of 2021? Another way of putting it is if there is a desire to make additional draws on fund balance, how large could those draws be, and keep the council comfortable with the way fund balance remains. So those are the questions for you to think about as I'm going through the presentation this evening. In terms of the policy framework, our financial management policy in Section 2 does speak of general fund balance and the policies around it. I've just got a few excerpts here. There's more language in the policy, but I think this gets at, I think, the heart of what is being discussed tonight. And I generally don't like to read what's on the slides word for word, but in the case of this, I'll just read it so that everyone's aware of the policy. And basically, it's the unassigned fund balance or undesignated fund balance should be approximately 15 to 20% of expenditures of the general fund. The unassigned fund balance of the general fund may never fall below 15% of operating expenditures unless authorized by the city council. And then the question of conditions for using fund balance. The policy section 2.3 speaks of three broad areas: temporary resources in the event of an economic downturn, resources to meet emergency expenditures, for example, floods, fires, earthquakes, for example, and then resources for one-time capital outlays that may be part of the capital improvement plan. In general, the policy speaks to using the fund balance for one-time purposes, although it does allow for the use of fund balance for ongoing purposes, provided that the mayor, the administration articulate in a transmittal letter, in this case the budget, why it's being used for ongoing purposes. And you may recall that this year we are recommending that a portion of it, and I'll speak to this later in the presentation, be used for ongoing purposes. And we did articulate the reasons for that in the budget materials that we transmitted to you. And I see that there's a question from Councilmember Hall, so I can pause there and take that question.
Thank you. This is Zach Hall. This is just another example of you don't know what you don't know. So I was just hoping you could ask what a one-time capital outlay is.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that I'll give you a recent example that I'll actually speak of a little bit in this presentation. So in 2019, when the city decided to purchase the Bergsma open space property, fund balance was used for that. That is a one-time property purchase, and that's an example of a capital outlay. Another example, I'm making this is hypothetical, but let's say the council wanted to build a new park or install playground equipment in a park. You could draw down fund balance. That would be a capital outlay if you wanted to use general fund balance for that purpose. Okay, so moving to the next slide, and I suppose the Bergsma acquisition is a good segue into this next slide because that's part of the story of what is going on here. There was some discussion at the last meeting about fund balance trends and past fund balance trends and how the city, more often than not, has been adding to fund balance over the years rather than drawing it down. And that was certainly the case up through 2018. And we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting. Some of that was overly ambitious expenditures, work plan items that the city just was not able to accomplish. So funds went unspent, expenditures went unspent that then reverted to fund balance. Some of it was on the revenue side. Revenues performed better than anticipated, and that contributed to fund balance. I mentioned at the last meeting that over the last 2 years, we've really taken a number of measurable steps to tighten up our budgeting practices so that hopefully you don't see those large contributions as was the case in past years. And those steps include, for example, having a work plan that is more realistic in terms of what we can accomplish. We spent a lot of time last year, and we talked about this when council was deliberating the 2020 budget. We identified that benefits were being budgeted at very generous levels, so we tightened that up. We built into the 2020 budget and capturing the savings at the outset of an underspend target. So we're tightening up the expenditure side, and that's one approach. The other thing that we have started doing, and you're seeing this throughout this year, is we're also first of all trying to be more precise in our revenue forecasts, and that's a concerted effort that we've tried to do over the last year and a half or so. But we're also monitoring the revenues more regularly and reporting back to council and making adjustments to revenue as the forecast changes. So for all of those reasons, we should be budgeting more closely to reality than was the case prior to 2019. Now, 2019 was a very different year. You will see on this chart that we drew down fund balance by $4 million. 1.5 million of that covered the cost of the Bergsma acquisition. It was originally higher, but we received a grant to replenish some of it. So of the $4 million, 1.5 million of that was related to the Bergsma acquisition. The remaining was frankly a budget that assumed revenue projections that were far rosier than what ultimately panned out. And we spent a lot of time talking about that throughout last year. Part of the solution to that was drawing down fund balance. The other solution would have been making budget reductions, but we solved it largely on the fund balance side, and then attempted to right size the budget through the 2020 budget process. And then through the 2020 budget process, there was another small draw on fund balance. So the take-home message from this slide is that since 2019, we have been drawing down fund balance. Now you'll see a yellow line on here that does some funky squiggles, and that's because fund balance. Our fund balance target is tied to expenditures. And in 2019 and 2020, we've had some interesting swings in expenditures. 2019 expenditures were unusually high because of the Bergsma acquisition. We're generally running at about 49, 50 million in expenditures. 2019, it bumped up to 62 million because of that Bergsma acquisition. So that draws down the percentage. And then 2020, the forecast this year now, our expenditures based on the mid-year COVID reductions are running lower than normal at 44 million. So that's causing the fund balance as a percentage of expenditures, that percentage to increase. So that's the bouncing around. So wanted to explain that, but the main point here is that fund balance is in excess of the 20%, the 15 to 20% target. And we have been drawing down fund balance since 2019. So I will pause there. I see there was a question and then a never mind, but maybe I'll pause there to see if there are any other questions.
Do we have any other questions? I'm not seeing any.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So I will proceed then. So this next slide is a chart that you saw on October 6th. This is modeling out the light green column in the middle is what we are proposing for the 2021 budget, which would be a drawdown of fund balance, $2.3 million. And that would that is because revenues are not equal to the expenditures. We're relying on fund balance to support some of our expenditures. What this does to fund balance is that it would leave us at year end 2021 with a fund balance of $12.7 million. But as we discussed at the last meeting, the administration is recommending that we designate $3 million of that for compensated absence liabilities. That would leave an undesignated fund balance of $9.7 million, which is 20% of expenditures. And you'll recall that the policy that I referred to earlier in the presentation speaks to undesignated fund balance being 15 to 20% of expenditures. So that's what's happening in 2021, but you'll notice throughout the forecast period and the financial management policies dictate that we go out 4 years beyond the current year, which is why this is displayed out through 2025. You'll see that we are relying on fund balance throughout the forecast period. And really what this is underscoring is the structural nature of the deficits that we are facing. And the structural deficit is defined as revenues not growing at a fast enough rate or at the same rate that expenditures are growing. Expenditures are growing at a greater rate than revenues are growing. And because of that, we are having to rely on fund balance throughout the forecast period. So basically, we're relying on fund balance to sustain existing services. Now, looking out into the future, we remain above the 15% target through 2023. Come 2024, if this forecast holds, and as I mentioned at the last meeting, there are, many things that can happen between now and 2024. Many things can happen between now and November, if 2020 taught us anything, let alone, 2 years out. But come 2024, if this, picture holds, then we would need to be having some discussions about whether we're reducing expenditures further or exploring new revenues to close the gap to ensure that that fund balance target remains within policy, which is, as a reminder, 15 to 20%. So, one of the questions that we received was, okay, what are the variables that could impact future fund balance? And I've added the structural deficit in this because they're in this context interrelated. So what variables might improve the outlook? What variables might weaken the outlook? And first and foremost is future revenue performance. We are in very uncertain times. The economy remains highly volatile. We've seen some upticks in sales tax in particular over the summer, but there are, to use a term that economists like to use, there are headwinds. We're hearing about more layoffs coming. Federal relief packages have stalled. Unemployment benefits are drying up for many people. So what impact is that going to have on our revenue outlook for the balance of 2020 and then 2021 and beyond? Certainly, the strength and timing of the economic recovery remains uncertain. So that's something that we need to watch. And one of the things I'll point out is with sales tax, our forecast, the fund balance forecast I shared on the previous slide, is taking average after 2021, is taking the average sales tax growth rate since 2006, which is 3.57% on average. But there were 2 years in that period where sales tax declined by 14, 15% a year. And there was 1 year where sales tax performance was above 20%, a 20% increase over the prior year. So you could have a swing of a decline to 15%, or you can have, past history tells us a year maybe where it goes up, 22%. So highly volatile, and fund balance is an important tool in buffering us from that volatility. Another area of uncertainty is state shared revenues. This year, the state cut the sales tax, the streamlined sales tax funds that we received. That was worth about $420,000. We receive other state shared revenues. When the state legislature reconvenes this winter to deal with its budget challenges, will they whittle away further at some of those state shared revenues? So that remains a vulnerability. On the upside, trying to be the optimist here, the Congress has not been able to get their act together thus far to pass additional relief for local governments. But I think, their hope remains, although the timing is highly uncertain, that, Congress will at some point act and provide additional relief to local governments. If that were to materialize, all of a sudden our outlook starts to look a little bit better. So there are definitely things on the plus side, there are things on the downside. Again, quoting economists, on one hand, on the other hand. In terms of expenditure demands, there may be pressures on the expenditure side. We are operating our parks program at reduced capacity right now because of the stay-at-home orders and the social distancing orders. When it comes time, when those orders are eased and we are are going to return our parks programming to more normal levels, there will be expenditure increases to support that. Now, there also will be hopefully some increases in revenues, but the revenues don't cover all of our costs. And then I see there was a question, so maybe I'll pause there before talking about the rest of these items.
Right, Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you. And Director Goldberg answered my question because I see the reopening of parks facilities is under the future expenditure demands. And my question was really, as we, part of the park services is a subsidized service. It doesn't pay for itself. And so you actually answered my question. I just wanted to make sure I understand that correctly. And you stated that. So thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Councilmember Ray has a question too.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Chris Wright. We talked about the uncertainty of revenue and the forecast, but what I didn't hear you talk about, other than hoping on federal relief, what are our other options for generating new revenue for the city that we should or have been considering?
Yeah, so the city is actually in a good position in that regard, in that we have not exercised all of our revenue tools. And so I say we're in a good position because you'll look at some jurisdictions in the region that have, in many respects, maxed out their revenue tools, so they don't have anything to go to turn to alleviate pressure. The city does not, and what I'm about to talk about, I'm not saying any of these would be easy to implement. I'm not saying that the council will necessarily like any of these, but they are tools in our toolkit. So, for example, last year we talked about the utility tax. We did increase the utility tax. There is room under state law to increase those further if there was if the council decided there was a need down the road. B&O tax is another one that we have not maxed out on. We also know that we have special revenue tools. So, for example, the Transportation Benefit District, we talked about that quite a bit about a year ago. We have a transportation benefit district. The city has chosen not to exercise any of those revenue tools. So under a transportation benefit district, you could levy a property tax, you could do a sales tax, a 0.2% sales tax. So that is a tool that is at our disposal. And so those, and then there's, your traditional levy lid lift that you could do, property tax levy lid lift to fund general purpose items, parks or what have you. We are not at our capacity on debt, so you could go to the voters, ask for a levy lid lift that would then support, for example, investments in our programs, capital items, things of that nature, and using bonding capacity for that. So the city is in a good position in that we've got those tools. Again, not necessarily an easy decision for the council, and some of these actually require voter approval, which also is another threshold. But there are options out there for the council to consider if it decided those were needed at any point down the road.
A quick follow-up question on the levy lid lift, if I might. Do we have capacity to do a lid lift on our current property tax levy?
We do. I can't tell you off the top of my head how much capacity we do, but we do have that capacity.
That would be a really unfair question for me to ask like that. So thank you very much.
I'm not. Councilmember Goodman has a question.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. This is a general question that I don't need all the details on tonight, but I'm curious if we have an opportunity on that $3 million question that you've talked about whether we want to designate it. Is there an opportunity to do buyouts of the obligations to get those off the books so it doesn't continue to grow, for example?
Yes, for a portion of it. So the compensated absences include three broad categories. It includes comp time cash outs. It includes vacation leave cash outs, and it includes we do a portion of sick leave balances as a cash out. So the comp time is the component of these compensated absences that basically is stagnant at this point. So the city used to have a policy that allowed exempt employees to earn comp time, to accrue comp time, and then if whatever balances weren't used, to cash that out. Earlier this year, the city ended that practice. So the comp time that is on the books is not growing anymore. It's what's there is there. It may even decline as if people decide to use it, although in practice, people will probably leave the comp time largely alone. So that part is stagnant. The vacation and sick leave, that would be a little bit more difficult to do a cash out because you're constantly accruing. Well, not constantly, but you're accruing vacation up to a maximum level, and that is designated as a payout when you leave. But if the city council were to decide that it wanted to get that comp time off the books, then yes, you could do a cash out from out of that 3 million and draw that down for the equivalent amount. The advantage of doing that is that the amount of comp time paid to employees is based on current salary. So as people stay with the city, in most cases, salaries are growing. So the cost of that over time will grow as salaries grow. So if you paid it out now, it would be at today's salaries, which would be lower. So that from a city perspective, it would cost less now. From an employee perspective, it doing that kind of a cash out, and there are different ways you could structure it, certainly, but doing that kind of cash out could have tax implications on the individual employee, particularly if employees have sizable balances. It could create some pretty big tax implications. So one strategy that council could consider if it wanted to do this cash out and not carry it over time would be to buy those balances down over, and I'm making this up just to give an example of maybe buy it down over 3 years, or max out each year a certain amount that you would do so as to soften the tax burden on the employee. But yes, that is, if council were to decide it wanted to pay it out now, that is an option, and you would draw it down from that designated fund balance, and that 3 million would be smaller based on that cash out.
Okay, well, I think if there's a tax in regard as it would be includable income regardless of when it's cashed out. So, well, anyway, that's interesting. I think at some point that might be something for us to explore. But anyway, you answered my question. Thank you.
Councilmember Ray.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Chris Ray. I want to follow up on Councilmember Goodman's question. And I don't care about the exact number, but in rough order of magnitude of the three categories of comp time, vacation time, and sick leave, how much of it's in the comp time category?
I'm going off the top of my head. Susie sent me the number, and actually I shouldn't do this. I want to say it's like 30%, but I'll have to get back to you with the exact number. And Susie may be able to even get an email out to all of you with that number while I'm speaking.
I will look forward to that.
Susie put in the chat that it's 40% is comp time.
Great. Thank you, Susie.
Okay. And I'm hearing people tell me if my mic's, the way my screen is working, I'm having a hard time finding my mute button. So I apologize. And I'm going to just chalk it up to user error. So I moved my microphone. I hope that's better for everyone.
All right. Councilmember Goodman has another question.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. Sorry, one more follow-up question, I think. So when we're talking about the cash out option, is that just a council policy decision, or does that require agreement by an employee, for example, that they're going to cash out early?
That is a good question, and one that I think we would have to explore.
Okay.
I don't know the answer, but it's a good question and something that we would have to research further.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. And so Beth, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of future expenditure demands, and I'll just quickly go through these, transportation and pavement management needs is something that is discussed frequently. And on pavement management in particular, we are relying on REIT funds for that. And that is, again, another one of those volatile revenues. But, I think the council would agree that there's always more we could be doing in the transportation and pavement management space. Certainly, parks and open space funding is a priority for the city, and then ongoing maintenance needs is something that has been discussed over the years. So that may present future expenditure pressures. Also, fleet replacement costs. We've been on a bit of I'll call it a rate holiday, where we've been relying on fleet fund balance to cover fleet replacement costs. We do have money in the budget to look at that cost allocation methodology for next year, see if there are ways of fine tuning that a little bit. But that is a future cost that will be coming down the pike for the general fund. And then, of course, there's always the catch-all of unanticipated emergencies. And, if 2020 showed us anything, it's, emergencies can happen. We had snow earlier this year. We had flooding earlier this year. And then here we are in October, 8 months into a pandemic. So fund balance is an important tool for that. And so that's something to keep in mind. On the upside with fund balance, we have applied for another grant, this time a state grant, to cover some of the costs that we've incurred for the Bergsma acquisition. At the time that we purchased that property, we did draw down fund balance for it on an assumption that we would be competitive for a King County grant that we received last year, and then a state grant. And it's looking, our application has been rated very, very highly. So we're optimistic that we will get some state funding for that. And if we are able to secure that funding, that would come in likely the latter half of 2021. And again, if that materialized, that would improve our revenue outlook. And then I see there's another question, so I'll pause there.
Councilmember
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Councilmember Goodman here. When you're talking about future emergencies, I don't know for sure, but something tells me that maybe in the interlocal agreement that we have with Eastside Fire, that agency does rely on its partners if there is a emergency. So I don't know the answer. I'm not sure if Administrator Bob Quitz knows the answer. I would have to look at the ILA. Every time you look at a contract, you're looking for something different. But anyway, that would be also one expenditure demand in the future that we might want to think about is that another agency, EFER, might rely on us for cash for emergencies. So it's just a comment in case anybody knows the answer. Thank you.
And if I may, Councilmember DiMichele, Councilmember Goodman, I think the answer is absolutely. If there's additional service needed because of wildfires here in Issaquah, I would think absolutely they would be coming to us looking for compensation for that. So I think any kind of natural disaster where we would need additional resources, if our city parks or city facilities were damaged significantly, we would look to reserves to help us get through any of those kind of emergencies.
Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Councilmember Martz. The question of wildfire was interesting to me. Do we not have, forgive me if this is a dumb question, do we not have insurance for such things? If a wildfire were to come in and, I mean, homeowners have insurance. Does the city not have insurance for damages that might arise from wildfires and floods and such things? Thank you.
Councilmember Martz, members of the council, we have some insurance. I don't know that any of it would be sufficient to cover all of our damages of public properties, public infrastructure. If you'd like, we can get you a more specific answer to that. Certainly, the Federal Emergency Management Agency provides assistance to local communities once a disaster is declared. So there would be FEMA funding as well, but I would be very surprised if any kind of insurance coverage we have would cover all of the losses we might incur during some sort of natural disaster.
And maybe if I could add to that, also, it often takes, if insurance or FEMA were to cover any of our expenses, there's often a lag time in the time it takes to receive those insurance or FEMA proceeds. So fund balance is an important tool to bridge that period while you were waiting for those funds to come in. And then, depending on the natural disaster, it could also impact our revenues, and that would be an ancillary thing that we would have to cover, and that component of it likely would not be covered with insurance. So, for example, an earthquake. A big earthquake may have similar effects to, frankly, what the pandemic is, which is, particularly in the short run, economic activity slows down, and that could impact our revenues.
Whoops. Councilmember Martz, did that answer your question?
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. Along those lines, if there was a big emergency and we knew FEMA was going to take a year plus to get us money, we have room in our debt capacity, correct? And then would that be something that we could rely on for if we needed a big bundle of cash to, handle something? What's the timeline to receive funds off of some of our debt capacity in that way?
Councilmember Walsh, members of the council, certainly that would be an option. I think, you start to play through the horribles of what may occur. If it's something that's more localized, I would think we would have ready access to cash. If it's a larger event covering a larger area, probably more difficult time. Again, I think that the point that Director Goldberg is trying to make when we look at emergencies is maximum flexibility. When you have cash in the bank that's yours, that you can access at any time, that's the greatest flexibility. Going to banks, getting loans, relying on other agencies, relying on insurance is all something that would likely be in the mix, but the flexibility of that and the immediacy of that is something less. So, I think we want to make sure that there's always some cash available to deal with issues. You never know what the magnitude of something might be. Obviously, these other options are more tools to use. So we're not saying that all the reserves need to be there for natural disasters, but it's just one of many things that I think that could happen that we would need ready access to cash.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. My apologies, Beth, but I'd like to, if I could, go back a couple of slides. I just want a clarification on the, can you go backwards? Yeah, the other slide, yeah, there. At our last council meeting, you had a proposed, we were taking $500,000 out on each. So when we see that declining fund balance, 8.8, 7.9, 6.6, and so forth, is that proposing that $500,000 is being taken out every year? Is that where that is going? Or I just need to understand how that money is declining. Is it coming out of the regular budget, or is that a proposal that we are going to transfer $500,000 out every year on that?
So what is shown on this slide is what's in the proposed budget. So this is what's in the mayor's proposal. This does not reflect additional draws on fund balance. And to model that out, you're correct. There was a slide in the last presentation that showed what that impact would be. To do that, first of all, I do have a slide on that right here, although the amount's not filled in. But to demonstrate that, that's when I would want to pivot to the Excel sheet, and I can show those impacts to you using that that model. But I also see there's another question, so maybe I'll pause and see. Do you want me to pivot to that now, or should we respond to additional questions before we pivot to that?
Yeah, I actually, that clarified for me. That was the question I had, so I don't think I need any further information, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Director Goldberg, does GASB say that you should have a plan for designated fund balances?
Not that I'm aware of. GASB has rules about what we need to designate as liabilities in our financial statements on the accounting side of the equation. What we're talking about here is the 12.7 million, for example, that we're talking about here in fund balance, is reflected in our financial statements. This is just the cash balances. This is not other assets that GASB would have us designate as our balances in our financial statement. So what we're talking about here is our cash balances, and then demonstrating of those cash balances what would be required to cash out those compensated absences. So it's a little bit different than the GASB rules. The GASB rules certainly require us to document our compensated absence liabilities. What we're saying here is let's be explicit and designate that for our cash balances.
Okay, so I know it's, with doctors, they always get nervous when patients go to, what they call Dr. Google. But it did look like, upon some investigation on my part, it did look like there was training around GASB that said that designated fund balances should have a plan associated with them. And I think it's a topic that when we get to comments, I may want to revisit. Thanks.
Thanks, Councilmember Martz. Beth, did you have additional information you wanted to provide to us?
If council was interested, I could pivot to that Excel sheet and just show you that example or a couple of examples of fund balance, or if you would prefer I'm seeing a comment that's at least one person is interested. So maybe I'll just take that as a cue. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and then pull up the Excel sheet if you will just give me a moment here. Okay, can people see that?
Mhm.
Okay, so so at the last meeting, I had a slide that displayed what would happen to fund balance if the council were to decide to use 500,000 in 2021 for ongoing costs, meaning that that 500,000 would continue into the out years. So if you do that, I'm going to just plug that in here. You will see and watch the fund balance line at the bottom. You'll see what happens is that the undesignated fund balance drops in the current year from 20% down to 19%. And by the end of the forecast period, undesignated fund balance, assuming, we designate the 3 million, would drop to 4%. And certainly by 2023, we would be below the 15% target. Now, on the other hand, I'm going to delete that. And then if council decided that they wanted to use 500,000 for one-time purposes in 2021, again, fund balance in the current year would, or the fund balance as a percentage of expenditures would drop to 19%. You would stay above the 15% target through 2023, and then be a little bit lower. I think without the 500,000, you were at 9%. By 2025, this drops it by 1 percentage point. Flip side, let's go big on the other hand. Let's say council wanted to use $1 million of fund balance one time. That takes us below the 15% mark by 2023. So it's both looking at what are the current year impacts and then what does it do in the future is the point that I wanted to make by demonstrating this for all of you. And maybe I'll pause there and see if there's any discussion on this. The going back to the rest of the presentation, I was going to return to the policy questions for all of you to consider, and I'm happy to then switch back to that if that's the preference of the council.
I'm not seeing any questions on the slide. I think that's a lot to. Can we play with this for a while? Oh, thank you for preparing it, though.
Yeah, so I can come back to this, or I can go back to the PowerPoint, depending on your preference of where you want to go with this.
Does anybody have questions or a suggestion for a different outcome that they'd like to see? I'm not seeing anybody in the chat. Shall we go back to the PowerPoint then? Councilmember Martz has a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to understand the question you just asked. I kind of assumed we're not at the deliberation point yet.
Right.
Okay, so it sounded like you were asking for the answer to a deliberation question, and I'm all of a sudden confused because I thought we were still at the getting information part, not at the deliberating part.
My question was, did anybody have a question about the slide that Beth was just showing, or did you want to try for a different scenario if you wanted to see her put in numbers, different numbers that you wanted to see? But I didn't see anybody that wanted to do that. If you would, that would be great.
Well, yeah, I'm having trouble parsing the difference between try different scenarios and argue and try to resolve some of these policy questions. But okay, let's go back to that spreadsheet for a second. I was picking at this idea of the designated fund balance. You know, what would those numbers look like if we had a plan to draw down the designated fund balance over the next 4 or 5 years, so that we get, because assumably at some point we won't be in an abnormal liability with HR. We'll look like all the other cities in terms of our HR liabilities, and we won't need to keep a separate designated fund balance. But I don't know if that's got a simple, I'm not sure that's a simple reckoning in your spreadsheet.
It may or may not be. I didn't set it up that way. It may not be so simple, or we could get lucky. So maybe what I'll try and do is explain it conceptually. So let's say that council decided that they wanted to pay out the comp time in the current year. And for simplicity's sake, Susie cited 40%, but for simplicity's sake, let's say it's a third, and let's say we would pay out $1 million of that $3 million this year. What would happen in this model that you're looking at here is that expenditures would go up from 49 million to 50 million. That would reduce the ending fund balance to 11.7 million. And then the designated fund balance would drop to 2 million, and the undesignated fund balance would drop to 8.7 million. Does that, and you know what? I might be able to do this. Yeah. This is what would happen. And then actually I should add, then in these future years, this would be 2 million. This is where it starts to get funky. So I don't want to play with this too much, but you would have to change this in the out years.
Councilmember Martz, do you want to add anything?
Well, just that it starts to make 2024 and 2025 look different, right? If you write 2, if you, let's say you go to that 2, right? Then 2025 starts to look different, right?
Right.
Because since your designated fund balance is becoming a larger fraction of your total ending fund balance, changes to it grow in relative importance in the out years.
Councilmember Ray has a comment if you're finished, Councilmember Martz.
I think so. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ray.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Chris Ray. I just want to kind of pick up on where Councilmember Martz was going. The change really would only impact 2021 because we would have greater expenditures, and so the percentage of undesignated fund balance would just be a smaller number. The out years all will look the same because we're just taking the 1-year hit. I have a couple of issues, and I don't know if this is the time to talk about them, but I'm talking about them anyway. One of them is we need to carve out this designated fund balance into 2 funds because one of them is a transient thing, which is the comp time, and the other is an ongoing thing, which is leave and sick time. So we need to deal with them separately, and I'd like to see them separately. Beyond that, I would like them not to be undesignated fund balances in the general fund balance. I would like them to be funds of their own, so we have visibility to them not only this year, but on ongoing years, so that we can see is the fund we're decreasing or increasing, and we can manage it as a fund instead of as a line buried within the ending fund balance of general fund, if that makes sense.
Can I offer a couple things on that?
You know you can.
certainly we could move these out of the general fund and have a separate fund for this. It does create less flexibility for the general fund. And so that's just something for council to consider as it's deliberating this topic. The other thing that I would offer up is that we don't necessarily have to bury it. You could have a designated line every year in the financial plan that would show this and explicitly call this amount out. So if it does stay in the general fund, there are techniques to ensure that it remains and remains as a visible item.
So my follow-up question to this is, what about the enterprise funds, and how do we do cost allocations for somebody whose salary comes out of an enterprise fund? Let's just pick on Public Works, since they would be enterprise fund. Are we capturing all in general fund, all of the payout for comp time, or do we cost allocate those across the funds?
This is just the general fund portion. So actually we can use me as an example. I'm cost allocated across a variety of funds. Part of me exists in the general fund, and part of me exists in the other funds. So what this would cover for me is the compensated absences for the general fund portion of my costs, and the non-general fund portions of my compensated absences would be captured in those other funds.
So we have an ending fund balance in our enterprise funds that is also falls in the same category as a designated fund balance, essentially. So we it's a larger problem, I guess, is my thinking, than just the general fund.
Councilmember Goodman.
Well, I think Councilmember Martz was before me, but I just have a clarifying question if Councilmember Martz doesn't mind. So Councilmember Goodman here. I didn't hear any objection from Councilmember Martz. So what I just heard you say, Director Goldberg, my interpretation of what you said is the $3 million is not the total liability. It's only the liability that's associated with the general fund.
That's correct.
Do we know what the total liability is?
I don't have that off the top of my head. Susie may have it, and if she does, maybe she could put it in chat, and if not, we can follow up. We could follow up in responses to council questions.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, and my apologies, Councilmember Martz.
No, that's quite all right. I was giving Councilmember Goodman the thumbs up, but she didn't see me. I was being uncharacteristically quiet. So this is Councilmember Martz. Two questions, one small, one big. The small question is, shouldn't this go down over time with turnover? With natural turnover?
Yes, a portion of it will. The comp time component will go down. Once it's gone, it's gone. There is a portion of this that will continue over time. So employees are accruing vacation time, sick leave time, and certainly as more senior people leave, the numbers might go down, but there's always going to be vacation and sick leave banks that employees will carry, that will be an obligation as employees turn over.
Okay, it feels different to me. The comp time thing, I get carrying a special fund because we have this unusual situation with comp time. Vacation and sick leave just seem like a thing every city has, every organization, every business has, and it seems weird that we would carry a special fund for that. It doesn't feel like it's got the same I don't know. It just feels different. It doesn't feel as right to me to do it with vacation and sick leave. I guess that's more of a comment than a question. But my bigger question is, so we talked about our policy of having a 15 to 20% ending fund balance. Do we still carry a policy that says not to use ending fund balance to solve structural deficits?
What the policy says is it indicates a preference towards one-time use of fund balance, or fund balance will support one-time uses. But there is a clause in the policy that does say that it could be used for ongoing purposes if an explanation is provided in the transmittal letter, and the budget materials that we've transmitted to you, articulate the reason why we are recommending this. Now, certainly, council could say we don't want to use it for ongoing, in which case we would have to make some additional reductions to this year's budget or identify additional revenues to make up for that gap.
But I mean, the policy states a preference for not doing that, right?
Yes, it does. And I see that City Administrator Bob Kowitz wants to comment, so maybe I'll pause there and see if he wants to jump in.
Okay, I have a further comment after that, but sure. Are you on mute, City Administrator?
Yes, I think maybe. I can't see.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
There we go.
Why don't you just finish the conversation, Beth? I was going to go back to another topic.
So I'll just follow on that comment. I mean, my fundamental, this whole exercise is weird to me. I think we're talking about taking an ending fund hit right now because we see ourselves in an emergency and that this is a year that we operate differently. But we can't. That policy that you just stated has been one of our guiding budget principles for the entire time that I've been on the council, and we won't continue to operate with a structural ending fund deficit. We won't do that in a regular year. We will cut expenditures to bring our budget in line. So this entire exercise has a weird what if to it that is ignoring this other part of our stated policy, our stated financial policy. So it's weird to me. I'm totally willing to say this year is different and we should operate differently because we're in an emergency, but we will have to get back to a policy of having expenditures match revenues.
Yeah, and I guess the other way of looking at this, and this is one reason why you show a multi-year financial plan, is so that decision makers could see what the trends are. And what the trends are telling us is to sustain ongoing programs. We will be running an out-year deficit. And as of right now, we don't know what that solution is to those out-year deficits. So by default, you are drawing down fund balance. Certainly, next year, we would be having a conversation around this time of, if that 900,000 that this is showing that we're drawing down fund balance next year, there would be a policy discussion at that time. Do you continue to draw down fund balance? Do you make additional reductions? Do you identify additional revenues? So that is something that is discussed every year. The message that we're trying to share with all of you in all of this is that we do have a structural deficit, and if the projections do hold, we will have an ongoing imbalance between revenues and expenditures. And the policy choice before the council is, do you continue to use fund balance for that? or do you make additional expenditure reductions, or do you increase revenues? So this is by no means intended to say this is we can't, none of us can obligate a future council, but the point being that we have ongoing liabilities, and if we use too much fund balance this year, it makes the out years that much more challenging, and limits flexibility in the out years, I think is the message that we are trying to deliver with this.
Right. Councilmember
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I see a comment from Councilmember Ray. Before we go there, I want to be mindful of time and the fact that we've been here for almost 2.5 hours discussing, and I'm wondering if the council would prefer to take a short break before we go ahead with more comments and deliberations, or if you'd like to plow ahead. So, and I can't see everybody because of the screen share. Beth, do you want to, if thumbs up, or people can let me know whether you'd like a break now or soon?
Councilmember DiMichele, would it be possible to circle back to City Administrator Bobkowitz? I know he had a thought, so before we take a short break, at least get the City Administrator.
That would be fine. City Administrator Bobkowitz?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to go back to this concept of a separate fund to hold the compensated absences and provide a little bit of perspective of what communities have done over time with this. When I first started in the profession in the late 80s, early 90s, every community I was aware of had a compensated absence fund, and you were very careful to invest in that compensated absence fund by the separate funds that employees were paid out of if they were for public works or utility funds, and you deposited those monies very diligently every year per employee, and then subtracted from them based on usage. And then recessions come along and those funds get depleted in order to save jobs and to save services. So I think communities have been back and forth with a compensated absence fund. Certainly in the last 10 or 15 years, I think most of the finance professionals I have worked with have really supported what Beth has proposed, and that is to have this designated versus undesignated lines in your fund balance, because as Beth said, it does provide flexibility. It provides flexibility for future unknowns. It also provides some flexibility when you go to rating agencies for bonding, because those rating agencies want to be able to clearly see what monies you have available to you. And as Councilmember Martz was alluding to earlier, but we really didn't get into, and maybe this is something for another evening, but our financial policies do talk about a GASB rule 54, which provides different kinds of designations for fund balance. And that's the kind of thing that rating agencies look very carefully at. Is that any money that is not legally bound by an act of voters or an act of a city charter remains money that you can use to pay for operations and you can undesignate. And so that's very attractive. And I think, given the volatility that many governments have seen over the last 10 or 15 years, having that governing body, city council ability to undesignate those funds with a majority vote has provided flexibility in economic downturns or during disasters. So I think that's where the change has come versus where it was 15, 20 years ago in the profession, where you saw a lot of compensated absence funds very diligently held. So I think any way works for you, but I think the flexibility of using your financial policies, keeping this within the general fund, is probably giving you the most flexibility for any unknowns that may come along. So thank you, Councilmember DiMichele, for letting me share that before the break.
That's great. And Councilmember Ray, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, one of the things that, thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Chris Ray. One of the things that is important to me is visibility into our financials. And this doesn't do it for me, and for a whole bunch of reasons. And if I could see a balance sheet where I could see the liability line that is our unpaid vacation and sick leave, I would feel much more comfortable. So it's about providing visibility into what's happening to our city financially. And I think we have a lot of ability to move funds as we need to. And one of the questions that Councilmember Martz asked a week ago was, how come, year over year, we've crept up on ending fund balance? And I think part of it's because we haven't had really good visibility into some aspects of where the money is going. And I have great hopes for next year that we'll get that with the Munis reimplementation. But, I think this is a huge amount of money. I mean, it's $3 million. It's, what is that? 5% of the general fund balance, and it's kind of sitting there as, well, it's committed, but it's not committed. So I'm very concerned about this number and about these funds, and that we think very, very seriously about how we're going to manage them going forward. That was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Ray. I am going to call a 5-minute break for everybody, and we will return at 9 o'clock promptly. Thank you. Beth, did you have any? Let's see. Beth, did you have any more slideshow to show us?
The last slide was just going back to the questions that we posed at the outset.
Okay.
So I'm happy to share that if you'd like, or not.
The problem is I can't see people's faces when that share screen is up. So maybe we can go back and forth. So, all right, we're waiting for Councilmember Martz. I'm going to count to 10. All right, welcome back, everybody. And we're going to finish the last item on our agenda, which is the proposed 2021 budget. I know that we had some emails for public comment, so I'll ask Council President Hunt to summarize those. Then I didn't want to cut anybody off, so if we have additional questions for Director Goldberg, we'll do that, and then we will go to deliberations. So Council President Hunt, if you want to share a public input.
Yes, thank you. This is Council President Hunt. We did receive one email specifically on this topic, and firstly, this person that wrote to us was pleased to see that there was relatively little drawdown on the ending fund balance, and thought that this was prudent given the economic uncertainty right now. Also, in terms of the budget overall, felt that additional police department staff was warranted, and also agreed with the parks and infrastructure positions added, and spoke to the importance of maintaining our public spaces and infrastructure. That concludes public comments on this topic that we received by email.
Thank you. And Clerk Agers, do we have anyone wishing to, in the public, wishing to comment on this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No one has signed up to speak, and I do not see any phone-in callers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
As I said, I didn't mean to cut anybody off that had additional questions for Director Goldberg. So are there any further questions? Seeing none, we'll go to the questions that were posed to you earlier. And I think the first question is, how are we feeling about having a designated fund for $3 million out of the total reserve funds, a designated fund for $3 million? Are we comfortable on that topic and opening it up for comment from council members? Let's see. Councilmember Martz is first.
Thank you, Councilmember DeMichelle. This is Councilmember Martz. So I was struggling to figure out what I didn't like about where we're at the moment, and it's because as an engineer, you design to requirements. You have a stress that's allowable, and you try to get just below that stress because that gives you the lightest design that you possibly can, which is usually the cheapest. And so I think we need to have a clear goal and drive to that goal. So if the administration thinks that we should have, and I'm just going to pull out a number here, 5%. If the administration feels we should keep 5% of ending fund balance around, not just for general issues, but for this particular issue, and if they think it's good guidance, then I think our financial policy should reflect that, and then we should drive to that number, right? If that is 20 to 25%, okay, and then let's drive to that number. We're not going to do it this year because we're in an emergency. We're going to do what we need to do to keep our feet pointed at the ground and our head pointed at the sky. But after that, let's get down to that 20 to 25%. I feel like there's a certain element. We need to have a goal and measure towards that goal and execute towards that goal and make decisions towards that goal. And so I think that we're not going to make a decision. We're not going to change our financial policy as part of the budget process. But I think that's, to my way of thinking, probably, and I could be talked out of it by my fellow council members, but I think that's probably what we want to do. But one way or the other, we want to set goals that we drive to. And I don't feel like that's what we're doing right now. We're sort of saying, okay, well, we have all this extra money, but it turns out it's fine because we have these liabilities we haven't really thought of before. I want us to be more in the driver's seat moving forward on this. Again, not this year because we're in an emergency. We're going to do things differently this year. But boy, oh boy, I want to tee it up for next year. And next year, whatever that number is, we drive to it because I don't want to be at 35 or 40% ending fund balance next year because that's not good stewardship of the public's money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. So I also was trying to identify why I was having trouble looking at the charts that Director Goldberg was showing us, and they are very helpful. But I think for me, one of the issues is that it's sort of like if we took the action we expect to take this year, and then we took our hands off the steering wheel and kept using the ending fund balance to fill the structural deficit, and then we go way lower within 5 years than our policy dictates. And I don't think we would do that because we wouldn't take our hands off the steering wheel, or future councils wouldn't either. So I think that that's one of my concerns or reasons why I was uncomfortable with the way that it was presented, but it is helpful to consider what would happen if we did that, I suppose. I agree, though, that I think using the structural, using this to address the structural problem over this next 5 years is not it's not according to our financial policy, and it's also not good stewardship of the funding. So we should, I think, endeavor to find a way to stay within the bounds of the 20 to 15% ending fund balance in a sustainable, more ongoing way, or at least approximately. I think it says approximately in our financial policy. So I would like to have that bigger conversation. Doesn't have to be tonight, but I think that that's important. And then as far as designating the funds, you know, we heard a lot this evening about how important it is to have there be flexibility. If we have higher than our policy dictates in the ending fund balance, and we have more flexibility with that funds, then that makes sense to me as one reason why we would continue to have a very high ending fund balance. So I would want to keep that flexibility. I think it is important. It's one of the stated reasons why we have this ending fund balance, and one of the good uses of that fund is for emergencies. So to have it available for emergencies if we need it. And then also, we won't need it all at once. It's extremely unlikely. So I think designate it is okay. I would think we could project how much we would use each year and designate that. That would make more sense to me. But the other thing that was really interesting from the conversation this evening was the idea of paying out the funding, because I think one of the benefits of that wasn't discussed, but I think would be a benefit, is it would give us more certainty about the timing as we use that. Otherwise, we don't have nearly as much of an understanding of when we would pay out the $3 million unfunded liability. I think that's it for my comments. Thanks.
I think that's $2 for me tonight. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. I figured that was the case. Councilmember Goodman here. Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. So the first two comments are that I don't think that the comp time vacation, or the comp time that we've talked about tonight, is it's not new. That is not something new. We've heard about this in years past. We have just not taken the step of making sure that we set money aside, designated, whether we put it in a fund, whether we put it as a specific line item in the ending fund balance with an explanation of what it is, so that we have, so that we know what it's for, but it keeps our flexibility. That's fine with me. I just think that it's our responsibility to, as fiduciaries, to make sure that we account for those liabilities and that we can pay for them. I don't know how well we can predict that, but I am in favor of a way to account for them, and hold our feet to the fire to make sure that we keep that money there. But also, I understand the benefit to have it be flexible if we were to have some catastrophic event. So are we just on that? It seems like people are answering other questions as well. So I'll just continue just for a minute. I don't have much. Neither is the structural deficit a new topic for us. I believe we heard about this, I want to say 2014. Director Marcotte first presented that structural deficit to us, that in much later years we were going to have to deal with it. And here we are. I am personally nervous about kind of playing around with what could happen. This is a pandemic, and who knows what could happen. As Director Goldberg laid out, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what the recovery looks like. We also could have problems on top of problems that we don't know about. I think this is the time for us to be conservative. In all of the years, the reason Issaquah has had a I want to say a healthy budget, and I don't mean healthy as in super big. I just mean we have been conservative in our planning in the past, and I think this is the time to continue that. Two comments. One is I just, during our meeting, put a question on SharePoint about wanting information to understand more about comp time, vacation, and sick leave payout, so we all understand how that's accounted for, just so that we can make some informed decisions. And then the second question I had was, I forgot, so I may have to come back to that. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you very much.
And to answer your question, Councilmember Goodman, I was making a feeble attempt to guide the discussion toward, are we comfortable with that $3 million designated? But we have another question on the table tonight, and that is, how comfortable are we for dipping into the reserve fund? So you can come back and make comments on that in just a little bit. I see that we've got several comments here. Councilmember Walsh, you, I believe, are next. No, sorry, Councilmember Ray, and then Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you, Councilmember Michelle. Chris Ray here. I just want to reiterate what I've already said, because I want to be real clear on this. We have to account for the money. At a minimum, we have to use it as an undesignated line within the general fund. I don't believe that goes far enough. From my perspective, at a minimum, we have to take the comp time that we owe people that money. That's an outstanding debt, as if we had gone out and borrowed money from someone. That money needs to be accounted for very explicitly. So, on the ongoing things around sick leave and vacation time, I might have some more flexibility, but just designating it doesn't go far enough for me. And the conversation about flexibility is, I think, somewhat irresponsible, because to have flexibility with someone else's money, which is what this is, just doesn't appeal to me. So I have some strong feelings, as you might feel or sense, on this one.
Now, Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. Gosh, I have to follow after strong feelings. That's hard. So I appreciate the difficult position it may put us in. I don't know, it's not even an ethical or moral situation, but the idea of like having liabilities towards someone and using that as flexible money. I think it's more of a, hey, let's make sure we look good enough to bond agencies that we have that in the same fund. So I think my preference would be to keep the amount in the same fund and designate it. But I think I'm with several of the council members that I've heard so far that I really want it to be for that comp time and kind of our extended liabilities, not for the vacation and sick leave. I think that's something that we can probably leave just in our fund balance and recognize that it's just an ongoing up and down type of fund as people go. So I'd like to see those numbers. And as far as, what comfort level there is for spending down any of that fund balance, I look at this 5-year forecast and I start to get really freaked out when we're looking at 13 to 9% toward the latter years. But I really appreciated what Council President Hunt said, which is the reason that gets to 13 and 9% in the latter years is because it's designed off of a budget that says we're not going to do anything to either increase revenue or decrease expenditures. We're just going to accept the fact that we know that there is a structural deficit. We're not going to do anything about it. We're just going to let that come out of fund balance. And that's just not the way that we work in Issaquah. We have tight situations of not having a lot of ways that we can increase revenue. And we have a lot of responsibilities. There aren't easy places to decrease expenditures, but it's what we have to do. And so looking at that and realizing it. However, when I look at that chart and I make the changes to say that revenues and expenditures are even, we remain at basically 17% for the remainder. So That, from my perspective, says we're probably in a good place if we're assuming that we designate a fund balance, if we're assuming that this year we have a drawdown of fund balance, and then if we assume that maybe starting in 2023, we're able to correct some of our structural deficit and we're no longer taking from fund balance. That leaves us at a 17%. So that's where my comfort zone is, because that leaves us in that 15 to 20%. But it doesn't give us a lot of room to spend during this emergency. And so I think that's the other part of the question that I want to talk about after we get to that point. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Councilmember Zach Hall. Still chewing a little bit on some of the comments that were just said. Those are really good points. I thought about this a little bit over the weekend. I guess actually let's just go for the first policy question. I think that the arguments of flexibility and a favorable bond rating outlook are most compelling to me. So at this point, I would be supportive of having that designated fund balance. For the second question, I think at this point in time, I'm personally not very interested in using any undesignated fund balance. But that being said, I feel genuinely lobbyable, assuming that we have a plan and there is a higher use for those funds. I guess the way I think about it is there's not really a right answer here. I think that if we're on a path to be good stewards of money, there are a couple ways of doing that. You could think of being a good steward as using that money to help folks here in Issaquah who are impacted by the pandemic or the economic crisis, or save it to support the future needs of those same folks as this crisis further develops. So I guess just going back to saying that I'm lobbyable, but at this point leaning towards not being interested in using that fund. Thanks.
Lobbyable is a new word for me. All right, Council President Hunt.
Well, I had a question, then I said never mind, but I'll go ahead and ask the question. Is the second question meant to talk about the amount of ending fund balance use that's in the budget currently?
I believe that what we're talking about is how much additional are we comfortable with? Perhaps we're not comfortable with any. And also under what conditions? Director Goldberg and I discussed there are many different, is it a one-time thing? Is it, are there external conditions that would alter your opinion? Those kinds of parameters around your comfort zone. Beth,
Okay.
do you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I understood that there was a desire to just sort of understand what flexibility the council might have with fund balance. And I think it might have been Councilmember Hall that said there was no right answer. And so, I think it is kind of a comfort level of what does the council, we've got the policy framework, but then within that policy framework, there's some flexibility both in the current year, but also it does require a multi-year outlook. So we wanted you to have all of that information, and then I think it's up to the council of are you comfortable where we are now? Do you want to draw it down further? If so, by how much? And for one time ongoing, I think that was, I think, the intended nature of this discussion.
Thank you.
So I see. Oh, did you have anything further, Councilmember Hunt? Council President Hunt. Councilmember Martz, excuse me.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. For my comments, I need a visual assistant. Beth, Director Goldberg, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you bring up the revenues per capita chart that you sent me a few days ago? Because it's very germane to my point. And I could ask to share my screen, but I bet you Tina would prefer if you just brought it up.
I could bring it up if you give me a minute. So if you have the patience to give me a minute, I could bring it up.
Sure, and I really don't want to start making my point until I have it up because it's really quite visual. Being an engineer, it's all about the numbers. Sorry to grind things to a halt. I could tell a joke, I could sing, but I won't. I could do another of my Churchill impressions, but I won't. If it's hard to get to, I can share my screen. You sent it on the 2nd.
So where it was, I'm getting an error message. Let me try another file here.
I can just share my screen if that's okay with Tina.
Here, I've got it. I've got it.
Okay.
I've got it. So just...
Okay. I feel like after this long pause, I can't possibly meet expectations having gone this long. But I'll try. I will endeavor nonetheless.
Okay.
Okay.
Is this the one you wanted, or there are a couple of them?
The next page, please. Or the one that's specifically revenues per capita. You had a chart for revenues per capita. I think it's probably further down the page. Further down that, if you scroll, there we go. Revenues per capita. Okay, there we go. So this tells us a couple of things. I believe that it tells us that aside from this emergency, we do not have a structural deficit. And the reason I say that is we have 6 years of sustained revenues per capita in or around the $1,500 per person range. We have 6 years, I counted them. So we were chugging along, and our revenues and expenditures without, major structural financial changes, we were chugging along and being able to provide the kind of per capita revenues that we wanted. The reason that this affects my answer to question 2 is I'm okay. I said earlier we're in an emergency. It's a different kind of time. I expect that if we wanted to, we could get back. We will get back up to that $1,500 line. There's a commensurate expenditure line. We could grow expenditures slower. There's a big gap there, right? It's $1,200 per person versus $1,500 per person right now, which we're holding in 2021. We'll go back to the ability to go to that other number when we get past this emergency. We may choose not to go all the way back up on expenditure. We may choose to use some of that for whatever, ending fund balance or other things. So first off, fundamentally, I don't believe 5 years from now we're going to be at 9% on ending fund balance, because I don't believe this. I believe this tells us we don't have a structural deficit. But in specific answer to question number 2, I am okay with spending more, using some ending fund balance to go some distance, but not all the way back up to the expenditures that we saw before this emergency hit. I think this emergency is a singular event. It doesn't represent a change in the trajectory of our city. It represents a heck of a speed bump. And so for me, I'm very comfortable saying this year is going to be different. Spend some money that in any other year I would be dead set against doing, because I just don't believe there is a structural deficit as reflected in this chart. So thank you for bringing that up, and I hope people found it useful to help me illustrate my point, although it's engendered a comment from City Administrator Bobkowitz.
So just give me a moment here. I'm trying to parse out the chat room here. So can we go to City Administrator Bachowicz, take his comment, and then I will go back and get people in line. So go ahead, Wally.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council. You know, Councilmember Martz is correct to look at this as a trending issue. But I think one of the things we have to be concerned about is that our expenses for providing like services continue to grow. Certainly our employment costs as far as employee benefits, insurance continues to grow, but probably even more important is our maintenance costs. That in order to maintain our existing infrastructure, streets, parks, water, sewer, those costs continue to climb. And so, you know, it's great to have an evening discussion to talk about all the money that we have available to us. But I think one of the messages I would like to just convey is that we need to continue to be thoughtful about those costs to maintain existing services, existing employment, existing infrastructure. Because with every passing year, we are facing additional costs to maintain infrastructure of all types. And so I think that the points that Councilmember Martz is making is a very important one. I guess I would just add to that, saying that those increased expenditure costs as we go forward are going to start growing a little bit more exponentially just because of the aging of the infrastructure. For all of the new development that we had, all of the street, stormwater, curb gutter, sidewalk that was installed by developers are going to reach their natural lifespan, and we are going to be responsible for replacing those. And so those costs are real, and we just need to be thoughtful about that as we move forward.
Thank you. I believe that Councilmember Goodman is next.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. And I'm embarrassed to say that I put that in there so long ago, I forgot what I was going to say. Never mind.
Okay. Council President Hunt, I think you're next.
Great, thank you. This is Council President Hunt. So I am comfortable with, especially with one-time expenses, using the ending fund balance, especially if it's also within the bounds of what's considered acceptable in our financial policy, which we've adopted. And I also think that sometimes deferring a lot of this, deferring a lot of the expenses could result in more expenses down the road because either that work is more expensive to do in the future, or if it's deferring maintenance, then potentially you would have a larger cost at the end of that as well. And so I think, you know, we have to weigh, there is no right answer to this question, absolutely, but we do have to be thoughtful, and I do think using it within the bounds of what's in our financial policy would make sense.
Thank you. Back to Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman here. So I remembered what I was going to say. I would be potentially comfortable spending a little bit, depending on what it was for. For example, one time, not ongoing, and I personally believe that Title 18 is maybe one of the most important projects that we have right now. I would like to get that done. And there is going to be probably an ask for additional money for next year by the ad hoc committee that we need to discuss at our next meeting or two. That would be something that I would look at spending money on, something that hasn't been updated in 20 years. We have been telling the public we're going to do it. So anyway, that's kind of where my head's at. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any more comments or questions. So I'll do a last call. Are there any more comments or questions before the chair weighs in? Great, okay. So, to the designated fund, I am very comfortable with having an undesignated and a designated fund. 8 years on the school board, that we always had both a designated and an undesignated fund. It tells you how much money you've got in the bank, but how much of that money is obligated, and it's useful and you can track it. And I'm actually much more comfortable with doing it that way than the way it's been done. So as for the expenditures from the reserve funds, I agree with Councilmember Goodman. I would be interested in doing that on a one-time basis. However, I understand, Beth, that we're going to get a revenue forecast before we do the final adoption of the budget, and I think, like Councilmember Hall, I could change my mind, or my mind could definitely be changed depending on what that revenue forecast looks like. And I also am not in favor of spending as much as we can. I would like to keep it to 200,000 or less on a one-time basis, and that would be about what I feel comfortable with at this moment. I think, again, we're in such a volatile position that it's very difficult to put a number on it right now, or to commit to anything, but I certainly would want to explore what we can do. The other thing, and again, perhaps this is something that we could discuss in more depth, but if we designate an expenditure from the ending fund balance, it doesn't need to be spent in January. It could be something that we wait and see. If we do have an eviction crisis, we wait and see if the rollout of this depression/recession is much worse or much better than we thought. We could hold on to that money for several months to see how things are turning out. So that would be my thoughts as of tonight regarding dipping into the ending fund balance. Any other additional comments before we close the meeting? Oh, someone muted? Oh, Wally Bobkowitz, did you want to speak? There we go.
Yes, Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council, I just wanted to say thank you for the discussion this evening. Certainly we will take these comments under advisement as the discussion continues. I think we will need to have the council take some specific action regarding designating those funds. And certainly there's additional discussion about spending fund balance for any one-time projects as we go forward. I've heard several members of the council at least express some interest in perhaps pursuing that. We'll be prepared to provide any assistance and information that the council may need as it continues its deliberations. So thank you.
Councilmember Martz has a comment.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Councilmember Martz. Just that, we hadn't really gotten into magnitudes prior to your comment.
I know.
I just want to point out that $200,000 on a $50 million general fund is a very small amount of money, right? It's 0.4%. So I just, if we were gonna spend more time this evening arguing specific dollar values, I might be interested in having further conversation. That seems like in the last 6 months, there have been many things that we've decided to spend $200,000 on that were not budget items. But that was just, I'm not suggesting that we go into a big discourse on the specific amount right now. I just want to point out that's a very, very small fraction of a $50 million budget. Thank you.
Yes, it was not my intent to take the conversation in that direction. So I was just throwing out a comment there, not intending to create more discussion. Any other comments, questions, or concerns before we adjourn? Thank you. I really appreciate the conversation tonight. I appreciate everybody's input, and I'm sure this will be an ongoing conversation. So thank you, and we are adjourned at 9:36 p.m. Thank you.